Is climate mayhem? I'm glad you asked. One day, Ty Wolf Jones and I were talking about some of the biggest, hairiest problems on Earth and came up with a hypothesis we wanted to test. If you believe in climate change, the only way we'll get past these massive environmental problems is if for-profit companies get involved.
In other words, we've spent hundreds of years getting into this mess. We'll need to spend billions, maybe trillions getting out of it. Therefore, companies need to make money in order for someone to spend it.
Then we asked, can we speak with a dozen or so companies in different verticals of climate tech who are making it part of their mission to be climate conscious and making big bucks while doing it? Well, we did just that.
Thus, Climate Mayhem was born. So follow Jacob Kubica and I along as we listen to some incredible stories to test this hypothesis. Oh, and are you an entrepreneur about to get into this space? You will definitely learn something from these extremely impressive founders and operators of just how possible it is to take on a seemingly impossible task. Mayhem on, Jacob.
Mayhem on, Ty.
Dan Greene. He's the SVP of North American Sales at Impossible Foods, possibly the Earth's most scrumptious plant-based meat company. And they have science and optimization at its core, not just great food. But their mission is simple: eliminate the need to make food from animals. And Dan's had an impressive career that didn't start in tech nor sales. He actually started as an aviator for the U.S. Navy. Aside from having over 1,500 hours of flight time in places like Iraq, Dan also spent 12 years managing the operations, 400 aviators, 40 aircraft, and tens of millions of dollars in annual budget. Since then, he's worked at Twitter, Google, but now he's at Impossible Foods, where he gets to lead sales at a company with a mission he truly believes in. Jacob, what'd you take away from this conversation?
Impossible is trying to make the impossible possible by making every meat eater an impossible eater. Now listen, look, they're trying to imitate the kinesthetic experience of eating a juicy burger. For example, they've injected potato starch into their patties to imitate browning, or they've used coconut oil in a creative way. For example, Ty, did you know an Impossible burger imitates the bloodiness of a patty somehow? You're going to be intrigued to find out.
Well, I already am, and so I can't wait. You'll also find out a few other things, like what does getting winged mean? How does a company go about replacing a staple with an alternative? Not a small problem. And of course, how much does Impossible Foods care about their competition? You might be surprised at the answer. So join us. This is a great conversation. You're going to love it. Stick with us and enjoy.
Mayhem on. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I thought we'd start off with a little bit of your history as a naval aviator. So do you love or hate the Top Gun #2?
That's a kind of a loaded question, I think. I love or hate Top Gun 2. So I'm going to be an outlier and tell you that I really did not like Top Gun 2.
Okay.
You probably don't hear that very often. But even if I suspend I can totally suspend the sort of like, hey, what they were doing is completely ridiculously unrealistic, right? I guess it's not about that at all.
Okay.
Because it was totally and completely ridiculously unrealistic. I'd say there's two things. One that I liked, and the big thing that I didn't think it was a very good movie. Like I didn't find the characters were interesting. I didn't find the story was interesting. I didn't fall in love with the characters and the story like I did the original or like I do many other movies. I thought it was like sort of plastic and cheesy and corny, and it just didn't have a good story and didn't have really very good acting or anything else. And whereas the original, and like you fell in love with the characters, the soundtrack, the story, it was touching, like all that, right?
Yeah.
And this one didn't do it for me. Now, that being said, the flying sequences and the videography and stuff was outstanding.
Pretty incredible. Yeah.
Very incredible. Yeah.
I just saw it last night. I was like, got to do some homework. I'm going to watch.
Yeah, it's good. That's fun homework.
I love it.
Yeah.
I guess it was it was unrealistic. This is the mission. You have to fly super low through this enemy territory, just back and forth. And you got to like escalate to the top of this mountain. And you got to go down.
The mission was a little,
The mission was pretty. Ty, you saw it too?
Oh yeah.
But in all fairness, like the sort of mission, even actually the mission in the first one and the stuff they did, like that wasn't. It was unrealistic, and it was kind of there was a lot of Hollywood to it, but it was like fundamentally not crazy. Whereas this mission, low level ingress to a sort of a vertical attack like that is something we train to all the time, but not realistic that you would do it. And certainly given all the whole scenario that they built up to it.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
It's great. A little grandiose. Yeah.
A little grandiose.
Dan, what did you fly?
I flew a similar airplane to what they showed in that movie, actually. I flew the F-18 Hornet, and the F-18's got basically two fundamentally different versions, but similar. What I flew was called the Legacy Hornet. And then what they showed in the movie was the Super Hornet, which is a slightly larger and different version. Still kind of the same airplane. And I flew that a little bit as well, but all my training and deployments were in what was the Legacy Hornet at the time. The Super Hornet was new.
The evolution of that plane.
Yeah, they say that the Super Hornet's sort of what they almost originally wanted to get out of the original Hornet, in the sense that it has the range and some of the weapons capability that they wanted in the original.
Okay. Very interesting. Oh, on the veteran podcast that you were on, there was a lot of lingo that went around. You mentioned just in passing the word getting winged. What does getting winged mean? Oh,
so let's see, it means when you're actually given your aviator wings, and it means you've completed training. So you graduate from college, or from, in my case, the Naval Academy, and you get commissioned as a ensign or second lieutenant in the military, which is the first rank of any officer grade. And then you go through training. In fact, anything you do, whether it's ships or tanks or anything, supply chain, you're going to spend anywhere from 6 months to, in my case, 2 years going through training for that profession. And at the completion of that basic flight training, well, not basic, but at the completion of a certain point in your training, before you learn how to fly the plane you're going to fly in the fleet. So all aviators go through flight school. And at the completion of flight school, you get winged, and you're officially a naval aviator. And then you go learn how to fly the specific airplane that you're going to fly in the fleet.
Got it.
Very interesting. And I don't know if this is what it's like in naval aviation, but I guess it is what it's like in tech. Is they interview to find the right fit. But in the military, for example, it actually might be they accept a lot of people and then they filter out to get the right qualification, or someone who's like really dedicated or has the right skills and has that discipline. Do you see it like that too a little bit? Is like, how do you become a naval aviator?
There is a lot of filtering. I mean, it's not designed specifically to filter. It happens in the process, whatever the process is for any kind of training, you end up filtering, but it's not designed to weed people out. I mean, if anything, if you think about it, ideally they'd have some set of signals that indicate that you're going to be a great aviator or whatever it is, right? And they could interview you and or test for those things, and then have a 99% throughput rate. Because every person who fails out or washes out or doesn't complete training is a total waste of money and resources.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing could be said for interviewing at a company. And so, yeah, I mean, essentially the Navy, so every year they basically they look at their whole, the whole organization and say, look, we're going to need this many aviators and this many sub drivers and this many ship drivers and so on and so forth. And then those positions become available to all the sort of newly commissioned officers at different points throughout the year. In order for you to have your choice, you have to be physically qualified for whatever your choice is. And then it has to be available. And it's conceivable, like at the Naval Academy, we graduated 1,000. Back when I was there, we started with 1,400. We graduated a little less than 1,000. And they ranked you 1 through 1,000 based off of your academic score and your military score over the course of, this was 3.5 years in. And then they called down number 1 through 25. You got in line you're in this, one area, and you got in line and you went into the selection area and you selected your profession. And aviation went out at, say, number 700. If you were ranked lower than 700, you weren't going to get an aviation spot, as an example.
Right.
The 1,400 to 1,000 is extra interesting to me because Ty and I both have worked, or I still work on the supply side of marketplaces. And I'm always thinking about, like, for example, at Assurance, It was a marketplace for insurance agents and insurance shoppers. My role was to get thousands of insurance agents ultimately, right? And that kind of funnel, that filtering of how many start at the top and then come out the end. Like really, you can put a science to it and some sort of modeling, right? If you do it X amount of years. And I imagine the military, the Navy can all do some sort of like rough calculations based on, you could say, conversion rates, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They've got tons of data. They've been training pilots or infantry officers or whomever for a long time. And the military is a very large scale training organization. So they have whole offices and buildings of people devoted just to training.
Wow. Yeah. Makes sense.
Very cool. Dan, what got you interested in climate sustainability space? Or maybe a different way to put it is, when did you start thinking about some of the issues that are going on with climate and or sustainability?
So I think it's maybe a little bit of hardwiring in my personality. We all sort of like have different personalities and different interests that, get more or less hardwired and very, as we're forming into cells in the womb. And obviously we're influenced by our environments. But for me, I always felt a few things sort of innately. One is that I want to be a part of doing something for the greater good. That's always been something that I've felt strongly. I think it has something to do with the fact that I tend to feel very, very strongly against unfairness or wrongness, right? Like people being treated poorly, people being treated wrongly, people being treated unfairly. That tends to really get me going. And if I think about it, like it's not a huge leap to think about like, well, the environment's a good example of that, right? Like we're crashing our planet, and that just really doesn't sit right with me. And so part of this is sort of innate, I'd say, and it's related to that thought process, but it's also related to wanting to be a part of whatever I can do to help the greater good. And that was what in part drove me into the military. When I got out of the military, I spent years in commercial business one way or the other, but none of those companies, even like Google or Twitter, like they were trying to do their thing to make the world a better place, but like they weren't trying to save the planet or the environment. And so, right. Like, and then along comes Impossible Foods. And I'm like, holy smokes, here's a company that's like not only trying to build a commercially viable business, but the whole objective is to restore balance to our environment, to our planet, right? Save the planet for humans. And that doesn't come along very often.
Right. How long have you been at Impossible Foods now?
A little over 3 years.
How long has Impossible been around?
About 10.
About 10 years. Oh, wow.
Probably a little bit over.
So yeah, tell us a little more about that story of you meeting Impossible and getting to join and getting to know these guys and seeing that it was a fit.
Yeah, it's a good question. So coming from the tech industry here in the Valley, it's pretty common to engage with venture capital firms and their talent teams, and as they look to fill other positions. And I'd spent a long time at Google, then I spent a long time at Twitter. Then I jumped into this sort of startup ecosystem, which is a crazy place. And I went to a very, very early stage tech company, did that for about a year and a half, and learned a lot, but also learned that's probably not the right spot for me. What's a better spot is sort of the mid to later stage growth startups where I can get involved and help grow and scale the organization. And so I had left that early stage startup and was sort of thinking about my next opportunity. Coastal Ventures reached out and said, hey, are you interested in Impossible Foods? I had tried Impossible Foods in a restaurant. I thought it was fantastic. And my initial response was like, essentially that, like, wow, fantastic product. But I know nothing about sort of selling food or helping to manage a food company. And the role was actually for what eventually became my boss's job, which was essentially the president role, or basically leading supply and demand. And so I said, I don't think I have the experience for that, but I'm always willing to do it and give it a shot. So they're like, yeah, no, they're looking for people like you. So I spent a lot of time interviewing with the CFO at the time, David Lee, and Pat Brown, the CEO, and then a whole bunch of other folks that were here, and really fell in love with the idea. The mission was, holy smokes, this is awesome. It's incredibly mission driven with a very important mission. I could go back into being part of like contributing to the greater good, but also, be a part of a commercially viable business. So that's really a fascinating combination. Food is incredibly fun. Right. Like it's actually really fun to talk about cheeseburgers, chicken nuggets all the time.
It's fun marketing too.
It's fun marketing. And so I was like, I really fell in love with it. And But in that process, I was really clear with Pat and David at the time, like, guys, you can find somebody. Like, I haven't even been a part of a company making a physical good before. Like, half the stuff you want me to do, I know how to do. The other half, I would just, I'd figure it out, and I'm more than willing to do it. I'm here for it. But you also could find somebody with more horsepower. And they agreed. And so they hired my boss, Dennis Woodside, who just left a couple weeks ago. And Dennis had actually more experience, and he was the CEO of Motorola for a little while. So he'd been a part of a company making a physical good. He came on board, and I was still consulting and helping different companies. And 6 months later, he gave me a call and said, "Hey, I heard that you were interviewing for my job. Why don't you come lead sales?" And that's a much better fit for where I'm at right now, my experiences. And that's how it happened.
Nice. And so today, what is your role?
So I lead sales in North America, which is essentially 95% of our business, and Canada and the US. And then we've got a few international markets that we've also developed some teams and sell into as well.
So Impossible's really made, the news and their name in the last few years, but it's obviously been around longer than that, building that. And when you look on their website, they're talking a little bit about trying to get everybody to eat an Impossible burger. Who is your customer today? How are you getting that out there? I mean, you guys have gone about it in some unique ways. And as the sales guy, I'm sure you're having fun talking to different people and getting it into their hands. Who are your ultimate customers right now, and who are you going after?
So our ultimate customer would be anybody who eats meat or doesn't eat meat.
Okay.
But we're going after the meat eaters. Pat's vision for this company was brilliant. So, he took time off to figure out what he wanted to do in the sort of third trimester of his life. And this was probably 12, 13 years ago. And he thought, okay, what are the biggest problems facing society, and how can I be a part of helping that, solving for those problems? And he happened upon climate change. And then he happened upon the fact that animal food production is certainly the single biggest impact on climate and all these interesting ways.
More than transportation.
More than transportation. Yep.
Okay.
And so it comes down to land use, which we can get into. But anyway, the point is that he said, okay, well, it's animals, and it's mostly cows, and producing cows and eating cows are killing us. We got veggie burgers. Why don't they work? Well, it turns out that because veggie burgers aren't as nearly as good as a burger. Burgers delicious. It's freaking delicious. People love it. And he's like, well, okay, then there's no reason that we have to use a cow to make a burger. It's not like nature designed cows to make burgers for us. Then it's designed to be a cow. And his scientific mind looked at it and said, we can reverse engineer the cow, take it out of the picture, and go from plants to burger instead of plants to cow to burger. Brilliant. And then if we do that and do it really, really well, then we'll create a veggie burger essentially so good that the market demand will make the change. We don't have to convince anyone. Just make it as good or better than the cow, and the people's stomachs and mouths will take care of the rest. And it's brilliant, and it is beginning to work, and it will work. There's no fundamental reason that you have to get meat from a cow or from a pig or from a chicken. You don't have to. I think Tesla's proven that you actually can have a high performance, decent range on a vehicle and have it be battery powered. And I think we've proven that you can make ground meat from plants and have it taste so good that you don't miss anything from the animal. And we're just beginning. I mean, we are just beginning. And so I think I think that premise really works. What was the question? I went off track.
No, you didn't. That was a great intro into it. I was thinking also what you kind of teed up. Go ahead, Dan.
No. I think you were asking how did we get to this point and selling the product?
Sure.
Who are the customers? Yeah.
But anyway, the whole point being that our customer is our consumer, our desired consumer is the meat eater, and the 90+% of our consumers are meat eaters.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. And so that's what I was kind of looking at. Your strategy, and I would argue your sales strategy was, well, based on what you just said, you've got to get people to taste this. Yeah. So what's your strategy there to get them to taste it first, to be able to say what you just said, which is this thing tastes so dang good, I don't feel like I'm missing anything. In fact, I prefer this. Right.
It happens in a lot of different ways, because people buy meat and buy food all over the place. They buy them. They eat meat in restaurants or food in restaurants. They buy it at the grocery store. They buy it at the convenience store. They buy it at the drugstore. They buy it at the sports arena, the hospital,
Interesting.
colleges and universities, all over the place. So you want to find ways of getting to the right customers and consumers in all these different places. The early version of our product was very different than the version we have today. The version we have today goes back to about 3.5 years ago. The version before that was a different formulation, and it didn't perform nearly. It tasted really good if it was done right, but like your average person it wouldn't work in retail because your average person would kind of mess it up and it wouldn't taste good.
Oh,
so we started the original version. We started going after celebrity chefs and gastropubs and the likes because we wanted to get that kind of vindication, right? Like, and if they're serving, it's got to be good, and then also that kind of expertise in preparing it, and that worked really, really well. And we got into a couple thousand restaurants over the first couple of years. And then in the beginning of 2019, we launched this newer version of our product that's ready really for prime time. And that's when we hit an inflection point and began to really scale the business into mainstream points of distribution. We signed Burger King and Starbucks, and then we also launched our product in grocery and retail. So now we're getting people to try our products, whether it's walking into a Burger King and getting a Whopper for a couple of bucks, or it's walking down the grocery aisle and either sampling it, because some stores are now sampling again, or better yet, buying a 2-pack patty and trying it at home. So we're kind of hitting people all over the place to try and get them to sample it.
Super interesting. And I think, that's the creative sales strategy of get it into get them to taste it, right? And taste it. And they're going to do it if they go with somebody they trust, like a chef at a restaurant. I think that's super unique. When I think about the Burger King, one of the questions we were talking about was this idea of the sustainability, right? The founders started with this idea of helping to save the planet, but I think people think of veggie patties for different reasons, right? Maybe health, maybe other reasons. So when you think about a Burger King and the sustainability message and this idea of like, we're trying to shift behavior of getting people to try this, do you care, I guess, about the sustainability message at that point, or is it just enough to get it into their mouths? And where do you go from there? Like, I go at Burger King, am I just trying it to experiment? How do I get that message that this is either for my health or for sustainability?
Yeah. So I think if you go back to look at our messaging and our focus over the last several years, because the company's been around for 10 plus years. We've only been commercializing the product for about 5, going on 6 years. And if you look at the history of that effort, most of our messaging is around sustainability.
Right. Okay.
And it turns out, frankly, I don't think people make decisions based off. I mean, half this country doesn't even believe in global warming.
Right. Right.
On the numbers, but tens of millions.
It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't think, and even the people that do believe in it, it's like people tend not to make changes until it's like in their face, right?
It's even hard to believe, even when you believe it.
You don't start filling sandbags until there's a flood coming.
Right, exactly.
It's like, so your average person chooses plant-based meat because of health, right? They think it's healthier for them. In fact, it is, if you look at it objectively, it's healthier for them, and they're making the choice because of health. The reason they come back or they don't come back is because of taste. If something tastes bad, majority of people, not everybody, the majority of people are like, look, if that doesn't taste really good, I'm not doing it. Now, some people, we tend to call them vegans and vegetarians, they're going to try it. And even if it's not the greatest, it's more important to them to be vegan or vegetarian and sacrifice a little bit in some cases. Whereas your average meat eater, which is the majority of people, if it doesn't taste good, they're not coming back. And we're fortunate that we've developed products that satisfy people so well that they choose it because of health, and they come back because it tastes really very, very good.
Nice.
It does.
And that's where you really start to get that behavior change, right? Of like, it doesn't matter, or I prefer this. Yeah. I think that's a big hill to climb maybe, but it sounds like you guys are hitting it.
It's a really big tie. Like it's not going to happen overnight, right? It took,
right.
So plant-based dairy, it's roughly 20% of the market these days, dairy market, roughly. Maybe it's 18 and change. But,
that's pretty big.
Go back in time, that's been around for 30 years.
Forever. Yeah. Soy milk's been around.
Yeah, soy milk. It will take a while, but I think that in my mind, I'm probably less than objective, I suppose, because I work here. But if I just think about certain things, right, it's inevitable that the vast majority of cars are going to be powered by electricity. I mean, it's inevitable, right? They'll go 1,000 miles on a charge. They'll recharge from the wind, solar, maybe nuclear. And that, if you still want to buy a 67 Camaro, you can, but the vast majority of cars are going to be are going to be electric. And that just seems inevitable. And when I look at plant-based meat and what we've been able to do and some other companies have been able to do, I just think it's inevitable that ground meat at the very least is going to be plants. There's just no reason to eat an animal.
It makes me think about why do I eat meat? Why would I? Right. And it's as much, I realize growing up, it was as much a logical answer as an emotional one. And there is some identity attached to it. I'm a vegetarian now. I'm able to trump that emotional through exactly, I'm like your ideal customer, like I came in through health. I'm not leaving because it is really tasty and it just gets better and better. Right. So I think it's fascinating. I feel like we could do an entire episode just on that. I guess switching gears just a little bit here. So Pat Brown, he was involved in academia and research for a long time. He was involved in even some research around HIV/AIDS, I found. But Impossible took the capitalist route of this. Pat wasn't an MBA graduate or a business guy. Why do you think Impossible took the more capitalist for-profit route with this?
That's a pretty smart guy.
Okay.
He started out as a pediatrician. He's been a vegetarian since the 70s. He eventually got into academia and all sorts of other sort of related fields. He's brilliant. He was smart enough, even though he's an academic and even though he's a scientist, he was smart enough to understand one of the most powerful forces, I think, on the planet is the movement of people. And the market tends to move people like nothing else. And so he looked at the situation and he said, and black bean burgers and veggie burgers and all these things have been around for a long time. And, his take was like, they taste pretty good to me, but only 5% of the population's eating them. Right. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
And he realized that the only way, you're not going to convince, and we've been trying it for a long time, and you are not going to convince. I mean, it's hard enough to convince meat eaters to eat our product. You're not going to convince a meat eater to sacrifice that burger for a black bean burger. No way, no how. Just Jacob and a bunch of his friends. But that's it, right? So he's smart enough to realize that and figure out that, okay, then we need to create a veggie burger, essentially, that is in all respects the same as that animal or even better. And if we can do that, then market demand will solve this problem. And he's smart enough to realize you've got to create, a capital enterprise that harnesses market demand to really solve the problem.
Whoa, what a blast. What'd you think so far? Are you hungry for more? Go check out part 2 of this conversation.
But before you go, could you do us a huge favor and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it right now? It'd mean the world to us.
Oh, and if you're feeling a little frisky and you want to give us some feedback, go to climatemayhem.com where you'll find our contact link. See you soon.